I have some positive news for a change, some good news. Good things are happening. I know that all we hear is the negative stuff all the time, but there are good things happening. And one of the things that I came across just recently, hope this mic is doing well for you guys. I'm going to readjust it. Sorry if it makes noise. Is I was watching a documentary last night. Wasn't able to complete it before I went to bed, but I caught enough of it to get the gist of what it was about. I'm going to finish it up. About the Native American tribes on the reservations in America. And, you can't bring up the subject of Native Americans on reservations without thinking about the injustice of men against other men. And these things have occurred since the fall of man. Since the beginning, since the fall of creation, these injustices have been occurring. The first thing that happened after the fall was when Cain rose up and killed his brother Abel. And since that time, we have been a race of people who have committed all kinds of evil acts against one another. And this is no different than what has happened to the Native American tribes. And they're almost a banishment to their reservations. They are nations within a nation. They have their own sovereignty as a nation and their own laws. When you go on a Native American reservation, you're going into their territory and their rules and their laws, and rightly so, when you study the history and circumstances of it. But here's the good news. Under the radar, which nobody is reporting on, Native American tribes all across the nation, and I believe that the focus was on the Navajo Nation because I believe they were the first ones to really begin to spread this across the continent to the other tribes. They are coming to faith in Jesus Christ and building churches on the reservations. And you can see the peace. In the documentary when I was watching it, you could see the peace within their heart and the peace within their soul. And they are thrilled and excited to be a catalyst that God could use to be a positive effect upon the entire country. They want to bring this message of Christ to the entire nation. They talked about learning how to forgive the atrocities of the past. And they mentioned Wounded Knee and the Trail of Tears. And these are shameful things that occurred in our past that we have to live with when it comes to things that our ancestors did that were, Cain rising up and killing Abel, basically. That type of inhumanity of man to other men. But the positive thing is that God is still working. God is still bringing revival. He's still bringing great awakenings. And I believe that under the radar, there is a great awakening that's occurring, not only across this country, but in a number of places around the world. There are more Chinese Christians worshiping Christ today than at any other time in the history of China. Think about that. More Christians in China worshiping Christ than at any other time in the history of China. And that's a long history. We see this happening in Africa. Africa is becoming a righteous continent in many ways because Christians are rising up in Africa and usurping their proclamation of the gospel and affecting various nations in China to become nations that bow before the throne of Christ. And the reason you see these acts of atrocity against Christians in certain countries in Africa, I think Nigeria comes to mind as one of those countries where Muslim populations and warlords are rising up and they're targeting Christians and killing them. And this is a horrific thing. It's always horrific when persecution occurs. But under persecution, historically, it's been very consistent that the gospel becomes very powerful and spreads across that people group under persecution. The last figure I heard was 200 million people in China proclaiming a faith in Christ because God used the persecution of the communist government to spread the gospel. What happened in the first century? Well, it was the persecution of Rome on the Christians. I mean, they were persecuted by their own people. The unbelieving Jews persecuted the new Christians of the first century. But it was when Rome started really came into the persecution of the Christians that some with the Jews too. I mean, when Paul was going around persecuting them, it spread. They were spreading. But the point is, they spread throughout the Roman Empire and took the gospel with them. And the gospel of Christ grew exponentially in the Roman Empire during both the Jewish persecution, which clearly ended in AD 70 because Jerusalem and the temple were taken down in AD 70, and the Roman persecution, which continued beyond AD 70 for a period of time until Rome was saturated with Christianity. Charlemagne was the first Roman emperor to declare Christianity the official religion of the state of Rome, which in my mind was a mistake. Charlemagne made a mistake doing that. He should have never done that, because Christianity it's not a religion of government dominance, but it is a religion in which government is declared to be under the authority of God, under the authority of Jesus Christ, and should govern in an honest and righteous manner, a just manner, with integrity. That's the role of government. Not to become a state church or a theocracy, but to rule righteously. What did Christ tell the centurions when they asked him, what should we do? Christ said, well, be satisfied with your wages and be just and righteous in your dealings with the people. In other words, don't be corrupt. Don't do things the wrong way. Don't plant the drugs in the car, to give a modern illustration, in order to make an arrest. Be men and women of integrity and do things the right way. That's what Christ told them. And that's the same message to us today. But integrity is something that has slipped over time in our nation. And it's something we're trying to regain. And it's going to be quite a battle to do that. But this spreading of the gospel, this great awakening that's occurring among the Native American tribes gives hope that integrity will return to this nation. And I'm an eternal optimist. I hold out hope for these things, regardless of the circumstances. I don't look at circumstances. I look at what God has to say in His Word, and what God tells us transcends the circumstances. Circumstances are typically temporary, and they last for a short time. Persecution lasts for a period of time. It lasted for 70 years in the former Soviet Union. But now, Russia is largely Christian in their worship. You could pretty much say that Russia has become a Christian nation, because vast numbers of people, once the communist form of government, once the oppression or repression of people worshiping God and so forth was lifted, people came flooding, mass numbers of people came flooding back into the church, flooding back to seeking God, flooding back to Jesus Christ, because God made them hungry for something better than the atheistic, communistic government that they were under. Because that didn't satisfy them. That was not a good system. And they knew that. And it was a system that caused a lot of problems for them. So they came flooding back to Christianity. So our circumstances that we're living under right now, they're temporary. They won't last forever. And these elaborate plans, I know that, of course, we see these little indicators that the deep state, the globalist oligarchy, whatever you want to call it, they're trying to dominate us. They're trying to destroy parenthood. They're trying to destroy the family. They're trying to destroy marriage. And the reason is because these people that are running, for example, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that's what I was trying to think of, and like the World Health Organization, and other high levels of government in the world, they are heavily influenced by pedophilia. There are many pedophiles working in these agencies in high-level positions. Many sodomites who want to abuse children sexually and mock God in their lifestyle and maybe their words are in these high positions in office, or they're not office, but office would be an elected position. These are not elected positions. These are bureaucratic positions, which are very, very powerful positions in government. And so they're going to push an agenda to where they can get the supply of children that they need to satisfy their wicked and evil desires. And that's why you see these children flooding across the border, the southern border of the United States. It's a supply chain for the pedophiles. No different than the truckers trucking the goods from the factory to the grocery store, or to Ace Hardware, or to the local Dollar General store. You know, they're trafficking these goods to the stores and delivering them. Well, across the southern border, there's a delivery system trafficking children to satisfy the evil and the wickedness of pedophilia, so that they can have these children to abuse them sexually. And you know, they don't have a Christian worldview, even a worldview of there is a creator in which all of us are responsible. There is a God, Almighty God, in which all of us are responsible for our actions, and He will judge us one day. There's not that sense among these people. They have the sense of Darwinian evolution. And there is no God, or if there is a God, he's aloof, he's a deistic God, or whatever it might be. And it's just not living in reality. And they worship science as a religion. It's a religious worship. Because true science, when you look at true science, it does not verify Darwinian evolution. Darwin is dead, and his theory is dead. His theory died about 50 or 60 years ago, and it died with the advancement of science. And the intelligent design scientists and the creation scientists are light years ahead of their materialistic scientific counterparts, who are trying to explain the universe and trying to explain the existence of it from a materialistic viewpoint. And they're starting with a false premise and a false paradigm and coming to false conclusions because of that. And this is why, and of course that has influenced our societies, because our people's belief systems and the way they act and the way they think is influenced by this religious teaching that has been taught to children for a very, very long time in the public government, pagan schools. It was taught to me when I was in junior high school in the 1960s. It was a very long time ago. It was a lifetime ago. And yet this scientific myth, which was what I call it, a scientific myth, is still being taught today and influencing children today. And people grow up believing this nonsense, and they don't do further research and study. Most people are not lifelong learners. I am. I never stop learning, because I know that I will never be able to learn everything. But what I can learn, I strive to learn it. And so I continue to study, and I continue to learn, and I continue to grow. And I've read, I have Darwin's Origin of the Species, I have his Descent of Man, but I also have Genesis, the book of Genesis. I have Henry Morris's the Genesis Record. I have books by Stephen Myers on intelligent design. I have Dr. Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box. I've read both sides of the issue. And I found that the evolutionary side is bankrupt in their arguments. They can't answer the hard questions, but the intelligent design and creation scientists can. They can answer the hard questions because they begin with the correct premises and the correct paradigms, and so they come to the correct conclusions. And so what's happening under the radar, I believe, is that people are waking up to this, and people are not believing these false scientific myths any longer. Or in growing numbers, they're not believing it any longer. And they're not believing the deception and the lies coming out of the news media and out of government and out of government entities. The Department of Education is the largest distributor of deception and propaganda from the government that there is. And I would have to say that the news media is the second largest. And with all of their efforts, they still could not overcome the power and work of the Holy Spirit of God in the hearts and minds of people all across this land. And so they stand powerless against the work of God within us. So I was going to go into Isaiah some more and talk about why does God bring judgment upon nations and what facilitates or causes this. And it goes back to things similar to what we're talking about coming out of evolutionary thought. A lot of the things that we see today have as their root evolutionary thought. And when you hear these individual things that are occurring, you have to kind of start learning how to connect the dots and see how they're all related together. I'm sorry, I thought to touch my mic, you might have heard something on that. Like the things happening in California with Governor Newsom, and I just had one today. My brother sent one today where they're trying to take children away from parents if the parents don't believe in the correct social score type of belief, where when it has to do with transitioning children on their sexual preferences, their gender preferences. And the state wants to take children away from parents if parents are opposed to this. If they have Christian values and they say, no, we don't do that in our family. No, our kids don't do that. The state wants to say, well, you're bad parents and we want to take that away from you. And so if you look at that as an isolated thing, then you're not really seeing the whole total and big picture concerning how does it fit into the overall agenda of the globalist oligarchy and the globalist mindset. And how does it fit into the other individual things that are happening? How are they connected with one another? So what brings God's judgment? And I'll just spend a couple moments on this. Well, some of the things out of chapter 3, I've gone through parts of chapter 1 and parts of chapter 2 in previous videos. But let me just read a few things that I marked as I was doing my personal study. We'll go to chapter 2. Out of chapter 2, we'll go to verse 7. Their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses. And so this is where it's talking about them being dependent upon their silver and their gold and their military might. This is a form of idolatry. And this is one of the things that will bring the judgment of God down upon us, is idolatry in the heart. And idolatry doesn't have to be, taking a knife or carving tool and carving out a little wooden or metal idol, some little figure that's an idol. Idolatry really begins in the heart. And so we idolize certain things. Pornography is a form of idolatry. Depending more upon the government than you depend upon God is a form of idolatry. Depending upon your own ability to create your own survival buffer against things that the government might do, more than you depend upon God, that is a form of idolatry. So idolatry is anything that we put into our heart that becomes more prominent to us than God. That would be idolatry. So that's one thing that will cause God to bring judgment. Listen to this in verse 11. The lofty looks of men shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. Well, he talks about being proud and lofty. Well, what do we have? We're still in June. We're coming toward the end of June, and it's Pride Month, according to the proud and lofty. Well, God hates arrogance in humanity. God hates an arrogant pride in humanity. The term Pride Month is a direct attack upon the sovereignty of God. It's saying, look, we are puffed up. We are pride. We are our own little gods. We're not going to bow our knee to Jesus Christ. We're not going to bow our knee to God and his laws. We are in rebellion against that, and we are going to do anything that we want to do. And so Pride Month includes, or the celebration, this is the celebration of sodomy and pedophilia and any form of sexual perversion. Well, that's a celebration of the pagan. That's a celebration of those who have a reprobate or a wicked, evil mind. That's not the celebration of those who seek holiness. And Christ said, be ye holy as I am holy. And so this is another thing that brings that form of judgment down upon a nation. Here's another one. He talks about they're building the high towers and fenced walls to protect against another army coming in to attack. And this is verse 15. And upon every high tower and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the pleasant pictures, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low. And the Lord alone shall be exalted that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish. So God brings down the pride of men, and he tears down the fenced walls. Well, we don't have fenced walls today, but we do have systems of protection for a nation. We have navies to protect the coastline, shipping lanes. We have missiles that are kind of like a wall. They have a protective wall against incoming missiles and things like that. God can totally defeat all of that and take it down. Now there's another one in verse 3. The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50 and the honorable men and the counselor and the cunning artificer and the eloquent orator, the person who can speak in a really mighty way. And I will give children to be their princesses, and babes shall rule over them. He says, I will bring you down so low because of your arrogance and your pride that children will rule over you. And children will spit in your face and mock you. Even the elderly, people like me who are older, I'm considered a senior citizen now. I'm of the baby booming generation. And baby boomer generation, I should say. And if God brings this kind of judgment upon us, then the younger generation would be mocking me and making fun of me and disrespecting me and not giving me any kind of honor or respect for the years that I've lived and this kind of thing. That goes away. And that's because God is bringing judgment. He says, and the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. He talks about Jerusalem being ruined in verse 8, and Judah falling, right? He says, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. Because her tongue, why? He gives a reason. Because is the reason, and almost like a therefore in a logical syllogism, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord. That's the reason. to provoke the eyes of his glory. There are repercussions to rebelling against God. And those repercussions do eventually occur. Verse 9 says, the shew of their countenance doth witness against them. Now this is King James, old language, so bear with me on that. The shew of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Now I'm sure that ancient Israel didn't have what we would call today a Pride Month, but they didn't have to have one, to still do the wickedness and the acts that are represented by modern day Pride Month. They were still doing these acts. They were also back then involved in sodomy and pedophilia and all kinds of sexual perversions and sexual abuse. And God said, that is going to bring my judgment down upon you. He says in verse 12, as for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. The Lord stands up to plead and stands to judge the people. He's pleading with them. Look, turn from your ways and repent. I don't want to bring this judgment upon you, but I will if you don't repent. But then the next verse says this, the Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people and the princesses thereof, for ye have eaten up the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. And what do we see today? We see the poor being horribly treated. Homelessness has become an epidemic in our cities across America. This is a part of the judgment of God. Verse 16, more the Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty. Haughty meaning very proud, very arrogant, and walk with their stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. That is a very devastating judgment on the women of the nation of ancient Israel at that time. He says, you will be victims of sexual abuse. Why? Because you have raised your head, you've stiffened your neck, you have been very proud. You've demanded your rights, right? You've become women's libbers, if you will. Not in the sense of women being able to have the right to vote or something like that, where you're just trying to give people normal, everyday means of living a normal life. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about women being arrogant, right? Prideful. And you see this today with this. If you watch the movies, and I've noticed this, if you watch the movies, women are being depicted as being stronger than they are. Being, the man is the one cowering in the corner while the woman is out there fighting and defeating all the foes and being the strong woman. This is a form of pride and arrogance. This is not humbling before holy and righteous God. This is, I am woman, I am powerful, look at me. That is arrogance and pride. Men should not do that either. I am man, and I am strong, and I don't need God to help me. I can do this myself. No, that's arrogance, and that's pride. It's when you bow your knee before God and you say, Lord, do with me as your will determines. And whatever role you have for me, I will submit to that humbly before you. That is what we need to do. Anyway, it says in chapter 4, verse 1, and I'll leave it at this. And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name, to take away our reproach. In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them. They are escaped of Israel. God is humbling them. How is he humbling them? Through very, very dire hardship. We're being humbled as a nation right now under this current administration. Think about that. That's the work of the Lord. Let me read one more thing. What was the prideful thing that the women were doing? It describes it in a few verses, and I'll just read those few verses and leave it at that. In that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cowls, and their round tires like the moon. And it's very poetic language. The chains, and the bracelets, and the mufflers, and the bonnets, and the ornaments of the legs, and the headbands, and the tablets, and the earrings, the rings and nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel. This is a kind of a enticing sexuality of the women, right? I'm going to expose parts of my body to entice the men and to, this kind of thing. It would be the same as pornography today. Women participating in pornography to bring lust and enticement to men. So the changeable suits of apparel, and the mantles, and the wimples, and the crisping pins, the glasses, and the fine linen, and the hoods, and the veils. And it shall come to pass that instead of sweet smell, there shall be stink, and instead of a girdle a rent, and instead of well set hair baldness, and instead of a stomacher, a girdle of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. God knows how to humble us. God knows how to take the arrogance away from us and to put us back in our place. That we understand that we are his creation. We are not little gods, and we cannot make ourselves to be a god. But we walk proud like a peacock, strutting about as if we were invincible, especially when we're young, in our 20s and teens and 20s is the most dangerous time for that, because you're young, you're strong, full of power and energy in your body, and we tend to strut about. I know I did when I was younger. But as you grow older, you begin to humble more, because you don't have that strutting of your body. You don't have that strength of your body, and that begins to wane. But this is talking about God bringing them out of their arrogance and their pride and their strength of their bodies, the beauty of their bodies for the women, and bringing them into a situation where that beauty is gone. All the perfume and the fixtures and the fancy clothing and all that's gone. And the men would fall by the sword in the war. what's God doing to America today? He's humbling us. He's humbling us. He's showing us that we're not what we thought we were. We're not to be arrogant. We're not to be proud. There is to be no Pride Month. We're to be humbled before Him. How did He do that? Well, He's done it through the scamdemic, through the bioweapon shots that have devastated so many, through sickness, through the weakness of the body, and through other means. There's other means. My mind is not remembering everything right now that I wanted to really mention here. But you get the picture. Just look around and see what's happening around you that is embarrassing to the country, that is devastating you and your neighbors and your families. And just remember, this is a means of God humbling our arrogance, because we became too proud and we idolized things we should not have idolized. And that's why I believe that because we are being humbled, God will pick us back up from the ashes that He has created and the devastation that has been brought upon us. He will pick us up out of the ashes, and He will set us back up on our feet, and He will strengthen us in His power. And I believe that there is the Spirit of God will renew our nation as we humble ourselves before Him. And this is what we're seeing with the Native American tribes all across America. They have been humbled for many, many, many years. And because they were in such a state of humility, that was ripe for God to come along, Jesus Christ to come along, and to pick them up out of their humbled stupor, and to put them back on their feet and to say, "You have been humbled. Now I will use you, and I will use you greatly, and I will bless you, and you will have rejoicing in your heart." This is what God does for us. So don't look at these things as being negative. Look at them as being positive. Let's bow before Christ and humble ourselves. This is the solution to our problems. God can reverse everything that's going on at any point that He so chooses. Or He could bring more oppression down upon us. It really depends upon us and how we respond to God. Are we going to mock Him, spit in God's face, and shake our fists at heaven in our arrogance and pride? Or are we going to fall upon our knees as the publican and say, smote our breast and say, "Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner," humbled before God. And then the power of God comes in and picks us back up on our feet, and we begin to build this nation again, but we build it in the right way, and God blesses it. That's our choice. Which way will it go? I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I'm seeing hopeful and very encouraging and positive signs that we're starting to head in the way of humbleness and renewal. I'll see you next time.